Winter 1944. Eastern France and southern Belgium. German units are retreating along roads near Metz, the Ardennes, and the Luxembourg border. Many formations have been in combat since summer. Men are tired, vehicles break down, fuel is scarce. German commanders expect the American advance to slow as winter sets in. It does not. American units keep moving. Attacks resume quickly after contact. Positions near the Moselle River are lost faster than planned. Roads leading toward the Saar are cut without warning. German soldiers notice that there is little pause between engagements. When a defensive line forms, pressure appears somewhere else. When units pull back to reorganize, American forces are already moving again. In reports and prisoner interrogations, one American commander is mentioned repeatedly, not because of speeches or reputation, but because his formations advance faster than expected and do not stop. The name is George S. Patton. Later, German soldiers would use blunt language to describe this experience. They were not being literal. They were describing an opponent whose tempo they could not match. To understand how Patton earned that reputation, it is necessary to look at the situation the war had reached by late 1944. By mid-1944, the war in Western Europe had entered a critical stage. The Allies had landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Over the following weeks, American, British, and Canadian forces pushed inland, breaking through German defensive lines. The German army was stretched thin. Many divisions were under strength, and reinforcements were slow to arrive. After the breakout from Normandy in late July and early August, Allied forces advanced rapidly across northern France. Patton commanded the U.S. Third Army, which moved southeast from Normandy toward the German border. His units covered large distances in a short time, often outpacing supply lines and creating temporary logistical challenges. The pace of the advance surprised German commanders, who had expected a slower Allied buildup before any significant push toward the Siegfried Line. In early September 1944, Patton's Third Army reached the Moselle River near Metz. German defensive positions that were intended to delay the Americans while other units regrouped. But Patton's forces crossed rivers quickly, exploited gaps in German lines, and avoided long, static battles whenever possible. His armor and mechanized infantry moved in close coordination, supported by artillery and air reconnaissance. German reports from this period emphasize speed and unpredictability rather than sheer firepower. Commanders noted that American units did not pause for resupply or rest in the way German doctrine expected. When one area became contested, forces appeared elsewhere, forcing German units to constantly redeploy. The operational tempo created confusion and limited the ability of German commanders to mount organized resistance. By late September, Patton's Third Army had advanced to the vicinity of Nancy and the southern Lorraine region. German intelligence reports repeatedly mention a commander whose forces moved relentlessly. The description is not emotional or dramatic. It is a factual observation of movement, coordination, and the refusal to slow down. This operational environment, rapid advances, minimal pauses, and constant pressure, set the stage for German soldiers to later describe Patton in unusually strong terms. To understand why, it is necessary to see how he combined leadership, logistics, and battlefield tactics in practice. By the autumn of 1944, Patton had established a reputation among both Allies and Germans as a commander who emphasized speed and aggressive movement. Unlike many commanders who paused to consolidate gains or wait for full supplies, Patton's approach was to maintain pressure continuously. His goal was to exploit weaknesses immediately and prevent the enemy from reorganizing. The U.S. Third Army under Patton operated across multiple axes in Lorraine and the Ardennes. Units moved in rapid succession, often covering 20 to 30 miles a day. Mechanized infantry, tanks, and artillery were coordinated to keep advances continuous. Supply trains followed closely, but Patton often prioritized momentum over waiting for ideal logistics. This created a situation where German forces could not predict where or when the next strike would occur. German intelligence took note. Reports describe American columns arriving faster than expected, bypassing defensive positions, and cutting off retreat routes. Local commanders found it difficult to establish a coherent line of defense. The pace forced German units to react constantly, leaving little time to rest or reorganize. Several after-action summaries specifically mention that American movements did not follow conventional patterns. Patton's personal leadership reinforced this operational style. He emphasized forward observation, rapid decision-making, and flexibility. Staff officers were expected to execute plans quickly and adapt when conditions changed. Soldiers were trained and instructed to advance even when conditions were difficult, creating a sense of continuous operational pressure. From the German perspective, this behavior was unusual. Officers noted that American forces acted decisively and without the pauses they expected. Interrogations of captured soldiers often included comments on the relentless pace and coordination of Patton's army. These observations were factual, not exaggerated, but they contributed to the later perception that he was inhuman or unrelenting. By late 1944, this combination of speed, coordination, and refusal to pause had created a distinct operational pattern. German units were often reacting rather than planning, and this constant pressure would later be examined from several perspectives to understand why soldiers described Patton in extraordinary terms. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes region, Belgium. German forces launched a major offensive through the Ardennes, aiming to split Allied lines and capture Antwerp. The attack caught some units by surprise. Roads were congested, visibility was poor, and weather limited air support. German planners expected American forces to slow under the pressure. Patton's Third Army was positioned east of the offensive. Units around Metz, Nancy, and the southern Lorraine region had recently completed rapid advances. Intelligence reports indicated gaps in German lines, but commanders underestimated the scale and speed of the German push. When news of the offensive reached Patton, he acted immediately. Orders were issued to redirect divisions northward toward Bastogne, where American paratroopers were holding key positions. Despite winter conditions and extended supply lines, armored and mechanized units began moving without delay. Fuel and ammunition were prioritized for the forward-moving columns, while slower logistical units followed behind. Over the next 2 days, Patton's forces advanced up to 30 miles per day, moving through snow and limited road networks. Artillery units were brought forward quickly, and tank battalions prepared to relieve Bastogne. Coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery was maintained, with minimal pauses for rest or resupply. German units attempting to slow the advance were often bypassed. Defensive positions meant to delay the Americans for hours were overrun in less than one. When attacks encountered resistance, forces shifted to open sectors and continued forward movement. German commanders repeatedly reported that American units arrived faster than expected, sometimes in areas assumed to be secure. By December 19, Patton's columns were within striking distance of Bastogne. Reports from captured German soldiers noted that the pace of the advance left little time for planning or organized withdrawal. Units were forced to retreat or surrender simply to avoid encirclement. The combination of speed, coordination, and continuous movement created operational pressure that German forces could not counter effectively. This sequence of events, rapid redirection, sustained advance, and effective use of armored units, marked the decisive moment. It demonstrated that Patton's approach was not just aggressive, but operationally disciplined. It was the moment German soldiers began describing him in terms that suggested something beyond normal human command. December 20, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. American forces under Patton reached the outskirts of Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division, holding the town, had been surrounded by German units for several days. Supplies were low, and winter conditions made resupply difficult. Patton's rapid advance was intended to relieve the defenders before the town could fall. Armored columns moved through narrow roads in deep snow. Infantry followed closely, supported by artillery units that positioned themselves as quickly as the terrain allowed. Despite congestion and poor visibility, units maintained contact and advanced steadily. Commanders on the ground adjusted routes to avoid blocked roads, but no pause halted the overall momentum. By the afternoon of December 21, American tanks reached Bastogne. Contact with German units was limited but effective. The sudden arrival of reinforcements forced German commanders to reconsider their positions. Some units withdrew to avoid encirclement, others surrendered when cut off. Bastogne remained in American hands. German reports emphasized the speed and coordination of the relief rather than the size of the force or the firepower employed. Officers noted that the Third Army appeared where it was least expected and maintained pressure continuously. Captured soldiers described the advance as relentless, leaving little opportunity to regroup or plan defensive actions. The operational effect was immediate. The German offensive in the Ardennes slowed, momentum shifted, and Allied forces regained the initiative. The rapid relief demonstrated that American units could move long distances under difficult conditions without losing cohesion or effectiveness. This operation solidified Patton's reputation among both Allied and German observers. It was not a result of luck or excessive risk. It was the product of disciplined planning, fast decision-making, and strict adherence to continuous movement. German soldiers, struggling to respond to the pace, later described the experience in terms that suggested an opponent who seemed unstoppable or not human in their reports. The success at Bastogne marked the culmination of Patton's operational style: speed, coordination, and pressure applied without pause. It set the stage for the consequences that would follow in the final months of the European campaign. The relief of Bastogne marked a turning point in the Battle of the Ardennes and had immediate effects across the Western Front. German forces, initially advancing with the intent of splitting Allied lines and capturing Antwerp, were forced to halt and reassess their positions. The offensive, which had relied on speed and surprise, lost momentum as Patton's Third Army threatened flanks and supply routes. Units that had been advancing confidently were now compelled to withdraw or risk encirclement. Casualties on both sides were significant, though estimates vary. German reports indicate that several divisions sustained losses in the range of 15 to 25% during the Ardennes offensive, including killed, wounded, and missing. American units involved in the relief of Bastogne and subsequent counterattacks reported losses of approximately 19,000 men in the same period, with armor and artillery losses that included dozens of tanks and self-propelled guns. Beyond personnel and equipment, the psychological impact of the rapid, coordinated American advance was notable. German soldiers repeatedly cited the speed and persistence of Patton's forces in after-action reports and interrogations. They observed that American columns arrived faster than expected, applied continuous pressure, and often bypassed positions that would traditionally slow an advance. The operational style demonstrated by Patton, rapid maneuver, close coordination between armor, infantry, and artillery, and minimal pauses for rest or resupply, forced German commanders to react rather than plan. Reports from German high command indicate frustration and confusion. Divisions were redeployed multiple times in attempts to meet the American advance. Communication lines were disrupted, and logistics were stretched. Officers noted that the Third Army seemed to maintain momentum even under difficult winter conditions, creating a perception among German troops that the Americans were relentless. German prisoners and officers later described this period using strong, sometimes hyperbolic language. Some referred to the American advance as inhuman or unreal in reports, though these statements were factual observations of operational behavior rather than exaggerations. Soldiers commented on the constant pace, the unexpected arrival of forces, and the inability to predict the next movement. Reports highlight that what was most difficult was not the firepower alone, but the persistent tempo, which left little opportunity for rest, planning, or withdrawal. The relief of Bastogne had wider strategic consequences. By halting the German offensive and regaining initiative, the Allies stabilized the front in the Ardennes and prepared for renewed advances into Germany. Patton's Third Army continued to operate at a high tempo, moving into areas of southern Germany and the Saar region in the following months. The combination of mobility, coordination, and pressure allowed American forces to penetrate defensive lines that might otherwise have slowed the Allied advance. From a logistical perspective, the operation demonstrated the capability of the U.S. Army to sustain rapid movement over extended distances. Fuel distribution, supply convoys, and maintenance units were coordinated to support continuous operations, a factor noted in post-war studies of the campaign. Allied planners used these lessons to maintain operational pressure in subsequent advances, while German commanders struggled to adjust to a foe who refused conventional pauses. The lasting impression of Patton's operational approach emerged in both Allied and German records. For German soldiers, the Third Army's movements in December 1944 were unusual enough to warrant repeated mention. The combination of speed, coordination, and refusal to pause created a psychological effect, reinforcing the perception that Patton operated differently than other Allied commanders. This perception was documented in intelligence reports, prisoner interrogations, and post-war memoirs. The relief of Bastogne also influenced Allied planning in subsequent months. Commanders recognized that high-tempo operations could produce both tactical and strategic effects, creating opportunities for exploitation and forcing the enemy into reactive postures. Patton's style highlighted the importance of rapid decision-making, flexible logistics, and disciplined coordination across units, lessons that became standard in later operations. In the months following Bastogne, the perception of Patton among German forces remained consistent. His name appeared in reports describing American advances and their effects on morale and unit cohesion. Soldiers consistently cited speed, momentum, and coordination as key factors that complicated defensive efforts. These observations were not isolated. They were repeated across multiple sectors, demonstrating that the operational behavior of the Third Army had a measurable and widespread impact. In summary, the aftermath of the Bastogne relief reflects a combination of tactical, operational, and psychological outcomes. German units were forced to halt or withdraw, suffer casualties, and confront a foe whose movements they could not predict. American forces maintained continuous pressure, stabilized the front, and set the stage for further advances into Germany. Observations of Patton's methods, documented in both Allied and German records, created a reputation for relentlessness. While not literal, German descriptions of his behavior as inhuman accurately reflected their experience of an opponent whose forces applied speed and coordination in a way that was difficult to counter. This period demonstrates how operational tempo, leadership style, and coordinated maneuver can shape both the immediate battlefield and long-term perceptions. Patton's approach left an enduring mark on the Ardennes campaign, on German morale, and on the historical record of the Third Army's role in the final phase of the war in Western Europe. The events of December 1944 in the Ardennes highlight a key aspect of modern warfare: the impact of operational tempo on both the battlefield and the perception of commanders. Patton's Third Army demonstrated that continuous movement, rapid decision-making, and coordinated action across infantry, armor, and artillery could produce results beyond what numerical strength or firepower alone might achieve. From the German perspective, the speed and persistence of Patton's forces created a sense of pressure that was difficult to manage. Units were forced into reactive positions, defensive lines collapsed more quickly than anticipated, and plans for counteroffensives were delayed or abandoned. Observations recorded in reports and interrogations show that German soldiers noticed the relentless nature of the advance, and this became a defining feature of their account of the campaign. The descriptions that later used terms like inhuman reflected the operational reality, an opponent whose actions were effective, coordinated, and consistently fast. For the Allied forces, the relief of Bastogne demonstrated the value of combining leadership, logistics, and discipline in a high-tempo operation. Patton's approach emphasized maintaining momentum even under adverse conditions. Supplies were moved efficiently, decisions were made quickly, and units were expected to act without waiting for ideal circumstances. This operational model allowed the Allies to exploit German weaknesses and regain the initiative during a critical phase of the war. Historically, Patton's actions illustrate how a commander's decisions can have effects beyond immediate tactical outcomes. Speed and coordination affected enemy morale, unit cohesion, and the broader perception of the campaign. German soldiers, later accounts are not evidence of legend, but testimony to the practical consequences of facing a highly mobile and organized force under a commander who prioritized continuous advance. In the final months of the war in Europe, Patton's Third Army continued to apply these principles. The combination of movement, pressure, and coordination influenced both strategy and morale, shaping the course of operations in France, the Ardennes, and into Germany. The perception of Patton as relentless, or even not human, underscores a central point. In warfare, actions that cannot be predicted or easily countered leave a strong impression, and this impression is grounded in observable results rather than exaggeration. Patton's legacy in the Ardennes and the winter campaigns of 1944 demonstrates the importance of operational discipline, tempo, and coordination in modern military strategy. It also shows how the human experience of facing such forces can shape historical memory, even when no extraordinary myth is required.